Hi everyone. In this video presentation, we're gonna try to explain what is multi-threading in C# and .NET. Without further ado, let's begin. Okay. So before we can understand what is multi-threading, we need to first understand what is a process and a thread. So first, what is a process? A process is the way to isolate your application from interfering or affecting other applications on an operating system. So that means it is isolated and it has its own virtual memory, and it should not affect the other process or the other application or process in your operating system. Okay, so remember it has its own virtual memory, so that is a process. So what is a thread? So a thread is where your process runs. So it's like the virtualized CPU that runs your process. So your process has its own virtual memory, and then the thing that makes it run or execute its instructions is on a thread. So just think about a thread as a virtualized CPU. So you have your CPU, and then the operating system has this notion of a thread, so that the processes can run without affecting or interfering with other threads that is running on a computer or a CPU. I'm not sure if that is a correct explanation for that, but yeah. So just think about it as a virtualized CPU. Okay, so process has its own virtual memory that is run by a thread that has its own virtualized CPU. Okay, so now, because we already know what is a thread, but first maybe we'll try to give an example. Okay, so you have an app. Okay, so an app runs on a process, so it has its own virtual memory. And then, for example, an app that's going to execute two work or two tasks. One is to calculate get the temperature, and then also this app can get the user's information. Okay, so this application executes two tasks. One is for getting the temperature, and the other one is getting the user's information. Okay, so that is our app, and it runs on a thread. It runs on a process which has its own virtual memory, and then it's being run by a single if it's single threaded, so only one thread, so one process runs on a thread. So if it's going to get the temperature, the app is going to wait for the temperature, the calculation of the temperature, or the fetching of the data for the temperature, before it can execute the retrieval of the user's information. Okay, so it has to wait for the first task to finish before it can execute the second task. Okay, so that is when we are only using one thread, one process executed by one thread on a one application. Okay, so that's settled. So for multi-threading, so before in the previous slide, we only have one thread to execute two tasks. So it has to wait synchronously. It has to wait for the first task to finish before it can execute the next task. But if we're going to make use of multi-threading, and if our application is capable of doing multi-threading, so these two tasks that is gonna be executed, the first task where the fetching of the temperature and the fetching of the user's data and calculation for the user's data, will be executed simultaneously using multiple threads. So for in our example, the fetching of the data and the fetching of the temperature and the fetching of the data is gonna be like executed by 3 threads. So the first is the main thread, that is our application, and then the second thread is it's gonna be created by the thread allocated to a thread that is gonna be assigned with that task to fetch the temperatures data, and then another thread is gonna be created to fetch the user's information. And then after those are finished, so those threads are gonna be returned to the operating system. I believe there's a notion of application pool, but I'm not really sure yet. I forget what is the concept of that. But the threads are after that is gonna be returned to some like a thread pool or application pool. So yeah, so that's the multi-threading thing. It can your application can now execute multiple tasks simultaneously by using the capability of multi-threading. Alright, cool, thanks, bye.